Have you ever said, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me? Has anyone ever said that? Like maybe you remember that, like when you were a kid and maybe you were on the playground and someone called you ugly or stupid or made fun of your big ears. Why are kids so cruel, right? And you, just to make sure that they knew that they weren't bothering you, you as emphatically as you could yelled back, sticks and stones may break my bones, but your words will never hurt me. Because you wanted them to know that what they said made no difference to you. The only problem is that's a lie, right? Because words do hurt. And sometimes the wounds that words make go so much further and deeper and longer than any physical injury ever does. As a matter of fact, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21 says this, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And just think about that. Have you ever had somebody that you're really close to, and they maybe they give you a compliment or they encourage you or they told you they're proud of you? Doesn't that just empower you and make you feel invincible and make you feel alive when people say that to you? And on the other side, if there's some people that you're close to that ever yell at you, criticize you, or dismiss you, isn't that just devastating and crushing and even deadly sometimes to our heart and our soul? Words have power. And so today we're continuing our series in the book of Proverbs. We're going to be in Proverbs chapter 12. I'm going to jump around a lot. Any jumping around verses will be on the screen for you, so you don't have to follow those, but we'll be mainly in chapter 12 today. But what we're going to do today is see how Proverbs tells us about the power of words. Words were very important in the ancient Jewish culture, which Proverbs were originally written in. Most of the beginning, anyway, of the Jewish culture was largely an oral tradition. And what that meant is that the words of faith and truth were passed on verbally from father to family, from generation to generation. And when we read, particularly in the Old Testament, we're going to see a lot of times it talks about saying and hearing a lot more than it says about writing and reading. And that's not because there weren't writings, that these weren't being recorded, but the average household didn't have access to those, nor many of them could read those if they did. And so it was really on the burden of the parents, particularly the father, to pass those words on as accurately as possible to that next generation. It was vital that they get the right words. It was vital that they passed on the truths and the traditions and the commands that were given to their forefathers, to people like Noah and Abraham and Moses when God came down and gave them the words of truth. They wanted to pass those on accurately so those words mattered. It was also vital for them as they try to communicate feelings and needs and values for their family. God had told them how to interact with each other, how to treat each other, what caring for each other looked like. And so he says right there in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that you're supposed to talk about those things all the time with your family and everywhere you go. Let's repeat those things often. It was also vital for them to get the words right for just the proper structure of their culture. Things like commerce and foreign policy and judicial process. God had given specific instructions on how to handle those things so that we would have a properly functioning society. So they wanted to pass those things on accurately. But maybe most importantly, they wanted to get their words right because their words not only communicated their relationship with their Creator, but it says that they reflected their relationship with their Creator. Because in creation, when God created everything, He created humanity very special. It says He created them in His image, different than from anything else, from any plant or any other animal, because humanity could think and reason and remember and self-regulate and speak. See, speech is a unique expression of the divine image that's within each of us. That's something only we can do because it's something only God had done, and He put that in us. And so it's a very unique, special thing that He gave us. And so because of that, we want to make sure we use the right words. And so Proverbs is just full of some great thoughts on what God thinks about using the right words. And so we're going to jump in here in Proverbs chapter 12, starting in verse 15. It says, "A fool's way is right in his own eyes, but whoever listens to counsel is wise." And so as we hear that, there's a statement in there that we see repeated in Proverbs often, right in your own eyes. And that's a common problem that we see in Proverbs. That's a common problem we see in our lives, is that we think we know what is best. And because it's repeated, it's really to point out to us that none of us are immune from self-deception. We all at times can be tempted to think we know what's best. Proverbs chapter 3 verses 5 through 7, I think, gives that warning very clearly when it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways know him, and he will make your path straight. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. And so those verses tell us that if we trust in ourselves, if we think we know what's right in our own eyes, not only can that lead us in wrong paths, that can lead us into evil things. And so what we need to do in response to that is make sure that we fear the Lord and put his ways above our ways, and that we trust him and not ourselves if we want to find the right way. It's interesting, Proverbs 16, verse 2 and 21, verse 2 both say exactly the same thing. All a person's ways seem right to him, but the Lord weighs the motives. And so it's just, again, this reminder that it's so easy for us to slip into thinking we know what's best and forget to ask God what he wants us to do. And so we have to recognize that temptation. But how do I recognize that it's happening to me? How do I know that I'm struggling with that? Well, Proverbs chapter 12 goes on and tells us, starting in verse 16, it says, a fool's displeasure is known at once, but whoever ignores an insult is sensible. Whoever speaks the truth declares what is right, but a false witness speaks deceit. There's one who speaks rashly like a piercing sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And so Proverbs goes on to help us realize that our internal attitude is actually what's illustrated by what we say, what our speech is. So when we speak and we say things, that's really reflecting what's going on inside of us. Have you ever noticed that some people's speech patterns are always inflammatory? That they're always aggressive, that they're always confrontational, that they're always belittling, that they're always manipulating things, that's just their way of speaking. And on the other side, have you noticed that there's some people whose language is always peace-giving and healing, like it says there at the end of verse 18, that we have this tendency. Where does that come from? That comes from the motives and attitudes inside of us. And so Proverbs gives us some checklists to help us see like what kind of words am I saying, and what does that say about my motives? One of the places we find that is in Proverbs chapter 18. It gives us a whole list of common ways we misuse words. Like verse 5, where it says, it is not good to show partiality to the guilty, denying an innocent person justice. One way we tend to misuse words is by favoritism. Anytime we use words to exclude or demote others, that's a wrong thing to do. That's not what we're supposed to do with our words. Verse 6 says, a fool's lips lead to strife, and his mouth provokes a beating. Another way we tend to misuse words is violence. Does anybody know people who are always looking for a fight? Like they're just always wound up ready to argue. And sometimes that's physical fights, which, those aren't good, but sometimes those, they happen fast and quick and then they're over. But verbal fighting, verbal violence sometimes is those ones, again, that can last a long time. Anytime we use our words to control or belittle or overpower, Proverbs says that's wrong. And then verse 7 says this, a fool's mouth is his devastation and his lips are a trap for his life. Often we can use our words to create snares. Sometimes we create snares for other people. Sometimes we create snares for ourselves. Sometimes we do it by what we say. Sometimes we do it by what we choose not to say. But anytime we use our words to manipulate a situation, to hurt someone else or get our way, Proverbs says that's wrong. And then verse 8 says a gossip's words are like choice foods that go down into one's innermost being. We talked last week that there's Proverbs all around the world. Every culture has Proverbs. All throughout history there's been Proverbs. And I mentioned a Spanish proverb last week that said this, he who gossips to you will also gossip about you. Isn't that true? Yeah, so why do we engage in gossip? Well, gossip's deadly because people love to hear it and they love to share it. And the proverb here says, and it spreads, right, like wildfire. And it burns not just relationships, but bridges often when we do that. And so there's lots of ways we can misuse words, and anytime we misuse words, the Proverbs would call that foolish. It's this tension throughout Proverbs that we're either going to choose the wise thing or the foolish thing. And when we misuse our words, we're doing foolish things that distort reality and misrepresent the truth. But thankfully, Proverbs also tells us some of the right ways to use our words. So there's three big ways as you read through Proverbs that it tells us to use our words correctly. Sometimes Proverbs tells us to shut up. Now, that's a bad word in my house. My kids would say, you can't use that. That's the S word, Dad, right? But think about it. There's the adage that says, if you don't have anything good to say, what? Don't say anything at all. Sometimes the wisest thing to say is not to say anything. Have you ever said something you wish you could take back? Yeah, we all have. We're like, oh man, I wish I had not said that. But the problem is we can't take it back, can we? We can't get that reeled back in, actually. We can maybe deal with it, but we can't erase it. So that's why Proverbs gives us this encouragement. In chapter 11, verse 12, it says, whoever shows contempt for his neighbor lacks sense, but a person with understanding keeps silent. Sometimes we need, for the preservation of relationships, that we need to choose what we do and don't say. And Proverbs 17, verse 27 says, the one who has knowledge restrains his words, and the one who keeps a cool head is a person of understanding. If you feel the temperature rising in a situation, that might be a mark to you that you need to be cautious about what you do or don't say next. Sometimes it'd be wiser to wait and talk later than to say something you regret right now. So Proverbs sometimes tells us to shut up. Other times Proverbs tells us, though, to build up. Like I said at the beginning, words have the power of life and death. And when someone that is important to us comes and they encourage us or congratulate us or tell us that they're proud of us, man, that can really undergird us to take the next step we need to take in life, to give us, add courage to us to do the right things. And Proverbs has lots to say about that. It says, a person takes joy in giving an answer in a timely word. How good is that? Have you ever been wrestling with a problem or debating a decision or maybe struggling with discouragement, and someone came and they said the right thing at the right time for you? Wasn't that good? Wasn't that like God himself coming down and just shining on that situation to help you do what was next? Man, we can be that for people. We can be those people who go and build up in those situations. Proverbs 16:24 says, pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the taste and a health to the body. We can add life to people by encouraging them, building them up, giving that support to do the right thing and do the next thing that they need to do in their relationship and their walk with God. So we should sometimes shut up, we should sometimes build up, but then still some Proverbs tell us to speak up. There's times where we need to confront or correct or defend. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 5 and 6 says, better an open reprimand than concealed love. The wounds of a friend are trustworthy, but the kisses of an enemy are excessive. If someone you love comes to you and tells you that they see things going on in your life that need to change, you should be grateful for that. I'm grateful for the people in my life who've had the courage and the love to come do that for me. And so we should receive that from people who love us because they want what's best for us, and they did the hard thing by coming and telling us when they see a problem. Isn't that good? Proverbs chapter 28 says, one who rebukes a person will later find more favor than one who flatters with his tongue. And so that's a challenge to us who maybe are looking into other people's lives and we see them on a crash course with something that's no good. Like we shouldn't ignore that. Proverbs tells us that it is our job to speak up and come and say, hey, I love you enough to let you know that I'm not sure this is the wisest path that you're on right now. Starting in January, as we start our new year, we're going to have our campaign is going to be entitled, Am I My Brother's Keeper? Out of Cain's question at the beginning of Genesis. And the answer to that question is yes, we are. God calls us to love one another, exhort one another, challenge one another, support one another, carry one another's burdens. We are supposed to speak into people's lives even when it's difficult because we care about them and we care about their eternal destination. But then also Proverbs 31 tells us sometimes we need to speak up for people. Speak up for those who have no voice, for the justice of all who are dispossessed. Speak up, judge righteously, and defend the cause of the oppressed and the needy. And so sometimes we need to take difficult stands because we need to protect people or speak out against things that are wrong. And so God sometimes is going to call us to do those things. And so those are ways that we can use our words. So as we think about all that, ultimately what Proverbs reveals about our words is that our speech actually comes from our heart. Back there in chapter 12, verse 20, it says this. It says, deceit is in the hearts of those who plot evil, but those who promote peace have joy. And verse 23 says, a shrewd person conceals knowledge, but a foolish heart publicizes stupidity. And so basically it illustrates for this is if we have a problem with our words, we have a problem with our heart. That when we aren't using words correctly, it's because there's a problem in here that we need to deal with. Jesus himself once said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when we speak, it comes from what's inside of us. Jesus' brother James took that a step further and said this. He says, what is the source of wars and fights among you? Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you? When we struggle with what we say and do, it's because there's something wrong inside our heart. And so we've got to figure out how do we begin addressing our heart issues so we can say and use the right words. Proverbs 18, verse 15 gives us some clues into the first steps. It says, the mind of the discerning acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seek it. If we want to say the right things and do the right things, then we need to be those who are making sure we evaluate our heart and our motives, and that we ask for understanding, and we want to acquire the knowledge to do the right thing. And did you see how it says we need to do that? We need to do it by starting to use our ears rather than starting by using our mouth. We need to make sure that we're listening correctly to what God says and what his people are saying, and so that we can make sure that we are correctly feeling the right direction so that we can correctly say the right things. You know, just like our speech is this outward unique expression of how God's put his divine image in us, our heart is what highlights what it means to be an image bearer, to be one who reflects the image of God. You know, we uniquely are able to think and feel and love and know and speak things that God can do and we can do, but nothing else in creation can do. And because of that, as image bearers, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to reflect God with those things that he uniquely gave us. We're supposed to let other people know who he is and how he loves and how he cares and what he thinks and what he wants us to do. We're supposed to be reflecting those things. And so that's why we need to start by making sure we've guarded our heart to follow God's path. Proverbs chapter 4 says, guard your heart above all else, for it's the source of life. It's the source for everything else. And so we must protect it from wrong attitudes, and we must promote in it godly attitudes. And so that starts with evaluating ourselves and putting it up against what God says in his word. But it also, because they're so connected, while we guard our heart, we must also guard our tongue. Because as much as our tongue reflects our heart, it also directs our heart. The more we say something, the more we believe it, the more we allow it to guide us and direct us. Jesus' brother James, again, he understood this when he said this, for we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is mature, able also to control the whole body. Now, if we put bits in the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we direct their whole body. And consider ships. Though very large and driven by fierce winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how a small fire sets ablaze a large forest. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among our members. It stains the whole body, sets the course of life on fire, and it is itself set on fire by hell. James reminds us that our words have the power of life and death, not just for this age, but for eternity. And so, we want to guard our hearts, and we want to guard our mouths, and we want to find God's will and the way that we guide both of those things. Do you all know what a circuit breaker is? Have you ever seen one of these before? Circuit breaker, a few of you, yeah, Liam knows. He's held a couple of these, haven't you? Yeah. So these go in electrical panels in buildings. You probably have these in your house, in your electrical panel. And what they do is they sit in between the main power coming into your house in each of the circuits in your house. So for each segment of your house, maybe it's your outlets or your lights or certain rooms or certain appliances, they'll each have their own circuit breakers. So you can turn off just that part of the house and not all of the house at one time. And so they allow power through from the main source to your house. But they also have a really neat function is that they've got a fail-safe in there. So if on that one circuit, if there's an overload, it'll trip and turn the power off. Do you know why? So you don't burn your house down, right? So that we cut the power when there's a problem. And in much the same way, what Proverbs is for us, they're circuit breakers. They're to stand and help us between our heart and our mouth so that we stop and consider things before we set that fire ablaze that James was talking about. And so as we think about all those verses that we just heard, we got to start figuring out how do I use those verses that Proverbs gives me to make sure that I'm evaluating my words and my heart. And so one of the first things I think we have to do if we're going to do that is we've got to start taking those verses to heart. Something we challenge you to on a routine basis is to memorize Scripture. In Psalm 119, the longest chapter in the Bible, King David tells us that we should hide God's word in our hearts so that we might not sin against him. And so really the goal of having Scripture in our heart and memorized is so that we begin allowing that to be what informs our heart. And so as we've talked about some of these struggles, some of these temptations to be right in our own eyes, to speak rashly, to not speak up when we're supposed to speak up, these kind of things we're tempted sometimes to do, what we need to do is we need to grab those verses that remind us of what's right, and we need to begin memorizing those and putting them in our heart. So they begin to direct how we feel and think, as well as how we act and do. And once we start putting those in our heart, another great thing to do is begin praying through those verses. And what that looks like is this. It's just simply like taking Proverbs chapter 3. We could just simply pray, God, I don't want to be right in my own eyes. I don't want to lean on my own understanding. I want to follow you. I want you to direct my path. I want you to make my way straight. I want to trust in you and fear you and not anything else. And we begin praying those verses and asking God to do those things in our life. And then we need to keep those verses in mind. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but it is making sure you keep those present. So when you're tempted maybe to think the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, that you have those verses there as a tool for you. And maybe that's writing them on cards and pushing them around their house. Maybe it's putting them on notes on your phone. I don't know what it is for you, but you need to find a way to keep those verses present for you so they help you through that temptation. And then lastly, we need to review often. You need to keep a list. You need to review it. We're getting to the end of their year. We're getting to the end of this year's reading plan. We'll start our new reading plan the first full week of January, but there's going to be a few days in between where we don't have a verse for you to read. But we do have some encouragement for you. If you look at your reading plan, it's going to tell you, review some memory verses. Go back and read your favorite chapter. Take some time and pray through these verses. It's going to give you some of those encouragements, and I don't want you to look at those as days off. I want you to look at those as days for you to really lean back into the things that God's been speaking to you throughout the year and put those into your heart and pray through them and review them and keep them in mind so that we can keep allowing those circuit breakers to work for our life so we can follow God's path. I want you to think for just a minute about when you learned to drive. Now, some of us, learning to drive wasn't that long ago. Some of us, it was a really long time ago. Maybe for some of us, the most recent experience with learning to drive was to teach others to learn to drive. So I've gotten the privilege now to help train 4 of my children. I got a 5th one coming up that we're going to be training to drive, and it's really hard. I'm just going to say, if you've not done it or not done it recently, teaching someone to drive is hard. But whether that's what's in your mind or learning to drive is in your mind, I want you to just think about the process, right? Because what we're really doing when we're learning to drive is we're taking this 2-ton piece of metal and plastic and hurtling it down these very narrow lanes at inhuman speeds. And that is literally life and death, isn't it? And so because of that, we have to take great care in preparing. So that's why we have you read a book first, so that you at least have some sort of framework of like what the rules are and how to navigate this. And then we want you to get familiar with the tool, right? We want you to sit in there and know where your blinkers are and know the difference between the gas pedal and the brake pedal and know how to turn it on. When you go to take your test, if you don't know how to turn your car on, you can't take the test. So we got to make sure you know those things. And so we go through that, and then you begin carefully training, hopefully locally first, and then going out a little bit further with a trusted adult, a family member, a parent sitting in the seat next to you who's been there before, who can kind of guide you. And if you're in the seat of learning, you need to be able and willing to accept correction when we tell you, don't ever do that again. That is not the way we do that. Slow down, speed up, turn your signal on sooner. Now, all those things are because we care and we want to help you learn this the right way. And that's why we're going to do the same things over and over again. Let's turn again. Let's park again. Let's stop again. Let's yield again. Let's do that parallel parking thing one more time so we get you ready. And then eventually you're going to take a test. And once you have that driver's license, here's the thing, it's not over. You still have to be alert to what's going on around you because there's someone else learning to drive and they don't know what they're doing. So you always got to stay alert. Our words are the very same way. Controlling our speech is a prime mark of wisdom. Our words can be unstoppable, irrevocable forces of life and death when we speak them. And they're easy to say and they're hard to take back. And so we need to make sure that we're being cautious in what we say and that we're informing our heart and our words correctly. The good news is that God has given us some great tools, and Proverbs is a great tool. And I really hope that you go home and you begin trying to use some of those circuit breakers of Proverbs to help kind of disconnect some of the difficulty between our heart and our mouth, and we begin working on guarding our hearts and guarding our tongues. And I want you to do that, but I want you to know that that's not just good advice. You could hear all that and just think, hey, that's great advice. It's not just great advice; it's good news. And the words of wisdom that we find in Proverbs are actually the words of life. There's one time when Jesus was up speaking to a crowd, and he said some really challenging and difficult things in his message, and a lot of people decided to leave. And afterwards, he was talking to his 12 disciples, his closest disciples. He says, hey, guys, are you going to leave too? And I love Simon Peter's answer. This is what Simon Peter says to him. He says, Lord, to whom will we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. Here this morning, all of us have flaws in our heart. And every one of us have said and done things that we regret, that we wish we could take back. But the good news is this, is that Jesus already knows that, and he's willing to forgive us of those things if we'll admit them. And then once we've admitted those, he's forgiven us, he's willing to give us new and better things and redirect us. Jesus is willing, if we will come and admit our flaws and our mistakes to him, he's willing to cleanse us from the shame and the regret of those things that we wish we hadn't said and done. And he's willing to put us on a new and better path that he's going to guide us on. He's going to make our way straight. And if that's what you want today, if that's what you're looking for today, he really made it really simple. These are the simple words he wants you to say to him. Jesus, I admit I've got flaws in my heart and I've said and done things that are wrong. Will you forgive me? And because I believe and trust that you as the Son of God can forgive me and cleanse me from those things, I want you to be the Lord of my life. And I want to trust in you and not myself. And I want you to guide my life from here on out. And he's going to do that from the inside out because he's going to give you a new heart. He's going to give you a new life. He's going to give you a new direction. And so for us this morning, as we consider our heart and our words, will you turn them over to the Lord Jesus and ask him to do those things for you that only he can do? And when we inform our heart and our words with those words of life, it becomes words of life for everyone around us. Would you guys stand with me this morning?